It's 1999, the cusp of a new millennium, and fighting games have truly started to find their footing as a genre. While the boom created by Street Fighter II at the start of the decade may have died down, the genre's levels of saturation and quality have generally evened out. Fighting games have entered a golden age of sorts, and with heavy hitters like Tekken 3, the Street Fighter III series, the King of Fighters 98, the Darkstalkers series, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and Soul Calibur on the market, the standards have been set, and a whole new dimension is being explored by the industry. And while the big names of the genre have all entered the third dimension, one of them, SNK, is preparing to release an ambitious and experimental project. One that would unfortunately find itself relegated to obscurity by the sands of time. Releasing in May of 1999, Buriki One is a 3D fighting game made for the ill-fated Hyper Neo Geo 64 arcade board as a first-party release by the board's creator, SNK, also the only developer to release on the system. The game's premise centers around the World Grapple Tournament, a global martial arts tournament to be held in Tokyo. The game features a roster of 11 characters alongside an unlockable 12th, all from different martial arts disciplines, and is best known, perhaps even infamous, for its radically different control scheme. In fighting games of all styles, traditionally the player moves their character with an 8-way joystick and attacks with an array of buttons that vary depending on the game. Buriki One, however, flips this convention on its head. Movement is allocated to 2 buttons. You push both to block, and you can dash either forward or back by quickly tapping the respective button. The stick, on the other hand, is your method of attack. The specifics of what your stick does will vary from character to character, with each of the 8 directions having a corresponding action. While this might sound complex, it's all very intuitive. Every attack or action you can perform, or stance you can enter makes sense for the direction used, and will always somehow tie into the direction pushed. Quick punches and kicks from pushing forward, sways and dodges from pushing back. Even jumping into it for the first time, it's pretty easy to understand what each motion will make your character do. And at the character select screen, you can choose to turn on the second system, which will give a display on screen to show you what to do with the stick to complete an attack or a sequence, which can be great for learning a character, though your opponent can also see this and thus likely predict what you're doing. Now, without further ado, let's meet our combatants. The fresh-faced poster boy of Buriki One, Gai Tendo is an energetic fighter from Japan who uses total fighting, a style of his own creation that seems to draw on MMA. At 17, he's the youngest of the participants, and after barely graduating high school, he holed himself up in the mountains of Okinawa to train himself further. He entered the tournament, which would be his official debut on the martial arts scene to quote-unquote win a bet. And after winning all of his qualifying matches in under 5 minutes, he's garnered himself much attention from spectators. Guy lives up to the name of his total fighting style, as he has strong striking and grappling techniques that allow him to handily deal with the cast, and some flashy moves befitting of his boisterous personality. Guy is incredibly easy to use. The players must remember that as a jack of all trades, Guy is a master of none. His moves are good, but not great, as he hasn't got the best reach or the most power. But that's not to say that Guy is a weak character. He simply needs to make sure he's playing to his strengths and not his opponents'. Guy's greatest strength is his versatility, having strikes, holds, throws, counters, dodges, and tackles in his repertoire. This allows Guy to change up his approach depending on the opponent, far more easily than the rest of the cast. Guy's go-to techniques for his reach are his high kick and his middle kick to back tornado string. The high kick is quicker and it does more damage, but his middle kick string helps push the opponent back, assisting with ring outs and spacing. His evasive frog down and its guy driller follow-up can be devastating if timed right, and slider can be helpful in setting up his ground holds. Guy's main drawback is simply that, for everything he can do pretty well, another character can do better, as is the fate of most jack-of-all-trades type characters. But if you're looking for a versatile character, you can't go wrong with Guy. The Invincible Dragon, Ryo Sakazaki, makes a guest appearance from SNK's Art of Fighting series, being the only guest character in the roster. Ryo is one of the invited competitors, earning him a place in the tournament without needing to qualify. Seeking a challenge and to promote his Kyokugen fighting style, Ryo enters the tournament, representing karate. Though he lacks the fireballs and more over-the-top special moves of his other appearances, Ryo is easily one of the strongest characters to start with in Buriki One. He's relatively simple to understand and has a number of extremely useful tools in his kit. His striking attacks are excellent, making up for a lack of range with high damage. And his ability to poke with options like his left fist to combo right Churansuki and its high and low kick enders, or his low shin kick, which can also combo into his high kick, can make it very annoying for your opponent to make an approach. And Ryo is just as able to make his own approach, with his hien chipu kyak in particular being quite good at closing the gap. And while it can guard break, it will leave him exceptionally vulnerable if it doesn't. This is Ryo's biggest flaw, as his high damage options also come at the risk of being left wide open if used unwisely. To play Ryo successfully, you need to make sure to use his pokes and strings to keep the opponent in check, and your high damage moves to break through their attempts at offense. Still, this doesn't overshadow how effective Ryo can be. For members of the cast who lack good striking options, moves like his Koho or Koken, both special moves adapted from his home series, can be incredibly hard to deal with. And speaking of adapted moves, his Ryoku Rambu makes an appearance as an incredibly hard string of 8 specifically timed inputs and does a ridiculous amount of damage to the opponent. Even if the opponent blocks it, the final hit will always guard break, making it a, while unpractical, very flashy way to open them up. With his mostly simple techniques and his high damage output, Ryo is an excellent starting point for any player hopping into the game, and easily one of the most fun. Considered one of the top Muay Thai fighters in the style's home of Thailand, Payak Sitipitak is another of the tournament's invited competitors. A competitor of Muay Thai's welterweight category, he impresses crowds with his ability to keep up with the younger fighters despite his comparatively older age of 40. Looking to participate in the tournament as both his first overseas competition and as a sort of swan song before he retires, Payak hopes to make his family of 17 proud. With his long-reaching Muay Thai techniques, Payak excels at controlling the range of the fight and keeping his opponents right where he wants them. His various kicks and knees let him contend in close quarters and from a distance, though this reach isn't always complemented by matching power. His Te Si Krong is his main tool for maintaining distance, with some of the best reach in the game, and it has a handy follow-up in the left variation. Lovingly nicknamed the Flying Dad Kick by the staff, his Kao Loi is a devastating knee kick combination from his crouching stance and is a high-risk, high-reward option for sending the opponent back a good distance, but leaving Payak completely open to counterattack if blocked. Should an opponent make it through Payak's defense, up close he has his Kubizumo grab, which allows him to follow up with an onslaught of knees to rack up damage. And on the flip side, Payak's defense is bolstered by his ability to counter throws, tackles, and grabs, which can't be said for every character. While Payak is certainly a strong all-rounder, his main drawback is that individually, his attacks don't deal exceptional damage. Still, his ability to control the pace and range of a match and have an answer for almost any situation, not to mention his ease of use, make Payak a strong contender and hardly a poor first pick. A young Taekwondo prodigy from South Korea, So Young-sung specializes in the Neryo-chagi, and while his nerves can get the better of him in a fight, making him somewhat inconsistent in competition and often dropping titles just as quickly as he wins them, you'd never know from his flamboyant and stylish take on Taekwondo. Despite his showboating personality, So is quite intelligent, studying quantum physics at university. As a practitioner of Taekwondo, it's no surprise that Young-sung benefits from a long reach on a large number of his attacks. And while this reach is outshined by Payak, it's still nothing to look down on, because for what he loses in reach, he makes up for with quick, snappy options, like his middle and low Yopcha Jirugi. Young-sung's various strings provide some nice damage and usually a knockdown, like the evasive high through, which leads into the Bandai Dolyo-chagi and ends with a hard knockdown. And with such a knockdown, the quick speed of his Neryo-chagi allows it to be chained a good 3 times in a row when up close, allowing So to really maximize his damage. And, if you can make the right prediction, his slide feint and its follow-ups can be devastating. All that said though, he does have his weaknesses. The most apparent being his low resistance to throws, alongside not having one himself, and lacking counterattacks to prevent them. If the opponent can throw him off balance, it can be tough for So to regain the momentum he needs to take the lead. But, all round, So is no slouch. With good reach, and some practical strings and follow-ups, if you can keep the opponent under lock and key and make the right guesses, So Young-sung can easily take the win. Hailing from Russia, Sokolov is a gold medal Olympic wrestler of few words. But this quiet demeanor hides a relentless fighter, capable of bringing his opponents down to the ground from almost any position. A high school phys ed teacher outside of competition, Sokolov becomes a monster in the ring. Put forward for the regional qualifiers by the Russian Wrestling Association, and armed with his unrivaled technique, he easily made it to the top and into the tournament. Sokolov is the purest grappler in the Buriki One roster. Practically his entire moveset consists of tackles, holds, and throws. And the few striking attacks he does have aren't particularly useful. While Sokolov can certainly be played aggressively, he works best when played patiently. Lucky for Sokolov, he has a number of reactionary tools that can let him push through the opponent's offense and enact his own. For the mid-range, his sidestep has a punch parry that puts him behind his opponent, leaving them wide open for a throw. For high attacks, he has a drop, from which he can initiate his leg takedown. And for lows, he has a quick jump, which has no direct follow-ups, though you can input his tackle while you're in the air to immediately do it upon landing. His wide variety of holds, tackles, and especially his chain throws allow Sokolov to get ridiculous damage off single grabs. But with his aforementioned low defense, if the opponent can keep him locked down, Sokolov will crumble. And even then, if the opponent can counter your grabs, you don't have a lot. Sokolov is a patient character, requiring you to wear your opponent down, which may take a while, but once you have, Sokolov can easily make up for lost time. Currently holding the title of Sekiwake, Akatsuki-maru represents the ancient art of sumo. Popular due to his often alcohol-related antics outside the ring, he still exhibits the manners and physique expected of a sumo wrestler. Originally turning down his invitation, Akatsuki-maru had a change of heart and entered through the qualifiers, winning his matches with ease. Akatsuki-maru seeks to prove himself the strongest in not just sumo, but in martial arts itself. One of the more difficult characters to pick up due to his stances, Akatsuki-maru is not necessarily execution heavy, but simply needs to work hard to succeed. Akatsuki-maru is slow and doesn't have much in the way of reach, but to compensate, he's very durable, hard to throw, and can hit like a truck. As to be expected of a sumo wrestler, Akatsuki-maru excels at pushing the opponent back. His Tsupari is his quickest attack, and has a nice amount of reach. One of Akatsuki-maru's strongest tools is his immovable stance, with its high, middle, and low variations, as all of its follow-ups are unblockable and result in a knockdown. However, the startup of the stance is slow as sin, and you need to wait a little longer if you want access to the full string and not just the first hit. This should only be done in circumstances where you know you've got the time, as otherwise you're wide open. His evasive Kata Yusuri and Onishikiri are good for quickly going under a high attack or grab and result in a grab and a headbutt respectively. His headbutt in particular can be great for keeping an opponent at a manageable distance. Because of his strength over speed style and somewhat tricky to manage stances, Akatsuki-maru is not a particularly beginner-friendly character. But if you're willing to stick with him and learn his stances, Akatsuki-maru can be devastating. A heavyweight contender from Los Angeles, Rob Python gained himself a reputation as a dirty fighter in the boxing world for his use of illegal moves in the ring, though strangely, he's never been fouled. His use of illegal moves doesn't cover up a lacking fighter though, as Python boasts excellent strength, speed, and stamina. He fancies himself a professional and fights only with both arms if he thinks the match is worth his time. And if there's one thing that makes a fight worth his time, it's money. Rumor has it he only accepted his invitation to the tournament in exchange for a large sum of money. Hit quick and hit hard. This is the way to approach Rob Python, as quick jabs with long reach allow you to keep the spacing exactly how you want it. Python has a fairly simple moveset: quick jabs and larger wind-up punches. Once the opponent is locked down, Python can force his way through with his middle approach, or alternatively use his clinch grab. If an opponent tries to put the pressure on him, Python's not out of options. Like Sokolov, he has a jump and a duck, allowing him to evade and counter. Though Python's biggest weakness is his susceptibility to throws, being the lowest class in the game. And while he has a counter for tackles, after enough attempts, he's completely at their mercy. Which makes sense given our throws aren't exactly in a boxer's wheelhouse. Having a relatively simple game plan and similarly simple moveset, Rob's very straightforward to use, So if you're looking to show them how a professional does it, Rob's your man. A two-time Olympic gold medalist and member of the French Judo Association, to say Jacques Ducali is passionate about the art of judo is an understatement. Announcing his participation in the tournament the same day the event itself was announced, his enthusiasm was met with an official invitation from Tournament HQ. No stranger to mixed martial arts competition, Jacques enters to prove judo is the world's strongest martial art. As another grappler-type character, destructive throws and crippling joint locks make up Ducali's arsenal. But despite his imposing 6'1" physique, Ducali doesn't simply succeed by throwing his opponents around. Instead, the game plan is to wear your opponent's balance gauge down with his various grips and holds and score some major damage with one of his throws, most of which leaving the opponent prone for another joint lock. In particular, his kataguruma hits hard and leaves the opponent nice and close for a joint lock follow-up. And while poor, his striking techniques do have a good use. His ankle kick and tsuyo atemi both have combo throws that require incredibly tight inputs and work best when the opponent is worn down, but again leave them prone to a hold. Similarly to Sokolov, arguably even more so, Ducali can really snowball his damage. If you can land a succession of big throws and holds on your opponent, they'll go down quite easily. But again, much like Sokolov, if faced against a character who's able to keep him out with striking attacks, Ducali can struggle, having to rely on his more reactive moves, such as his suwarikomi or his fly swatter punch parry. Ducali is not an easy character. Despite how damaging his throws are, he needs to be played patiently to be effective, and take advantage of off-balance opponents to score big damage. His lackluster strikes mean that, aside from his somewhat slow overhead chop, he lacks range and lives and dies by getting close to his opponent. But, if you can get your hands on them, it's all uphill from there. To win with Ducali is simple. Play smart and play patient, and you'll be playing with power. It wouldn't be a fighting game without a representative from the world of professional wrestling, and none in the business can match the sheer charisma and raw power behind the techniques of Patrick Van Heating. 15 years into his career, he seems to value packing power into his moves over technical prowess, but this powerful style has garnered him an impressive fandom and a reputation as one of pro wrestling's top talents. His ability to cut a promo on the mic is legendary, and as one of the invited fighters, he plans to use these skills to promote his new wrestling organization, the NFO. If I had to sum up Patrick Van Heating in one word, I'd go with powerhouse. Unsurprisingly for a pro wrestler, Heating is able to take just as much punishment as he dishes out. Starting with his standard grapple, it's executed while moving forward and provides you with 3 options to follow up with. Firstly, you can use the short-range elbow, which can be chained 5 times and also cancelled into the other 2 options, the high-speed brainbuster and the jackhammer. If either are executed after 5 elbow shots, it'll more or less completely drain any character's balance gauge, meaning they'll be completely vulnerable to any further throws or holds. These throws can be escaped if done without starting with the short-range elbow, and given that that nets you more damage and melts the opponent's balance gauge, there's really no reason not to do it. Jackhammer is your best option as it deals the most damage on its own. And, if you really want to capitalize on damage, you can initiate grapple from his horizontal chop. Heating can also make an approach with his shoulder tackle. If you hold down long enough, the tackle will hit multiple times, and he covers a surprisingly large distance too, which can be very helpful. Heating's weakness, quite simply, is his speed. When put up against quicker characters, Heating can struggle to find an opening, and while he can take a lot of punishment, that doesn't make him invincible. If an opponent can put up a good enough defense, Heating can't do much but try and force an opening. But once he's got that opening, damage comes easily. He may be difficult to use, but in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, Heating can make a jobber out of anyone. Trained in the art of Aikido by his grandfather from a young age, Takato enters the tournament qualifiers at his request. His somewhat curt demeanor comes not from any malice, but instead simply from not realizing how he comes off. Takato seems uninterested in participating in the tournament, expressing in his ending that should another one be held, he will not participate. Takato is one of the most unique characters in the game. Somewhat hard to quantify due to this uniqueness, the main focus of Takato's techniques are counters and redirecting an opponent's strikes against themselves. Takato is purely reactive, and this makes him one of the hardest characters to master in Buriki One. Takato has very little in the way of his own offensive attacks, so you need to be ready to read your opponents, or you'll likely come up short. This means Takato has to rely almost entirely on reaction. He's a glass cannon with his counters dealing high damage at the trade-off of immensely low health. There's no effective way to play Takato aggressively, so a keen eye and strong patience are needed. If you aren't able to get a handle on his counters and react to your opponents accordingly, you won't get very far. Takato is for advanced players only and easily one of the most difficult characters in the game. But the potential of those counters can't be ignored, so if you can read your opponents right, Takato can dominate. Nicknamed the Relentless Tiger for his Shanghai fighting exploits in his youth, Song Juandao has been living outside the public eye on his farm for decades. He is asked by a friend of his, the chairman of a Chinese TV station, to participate in the tournament, representing Tai Chi. One of Buriki One's most interesting choices in fighting styles. The power of Song's Tai Chi is devastating despite being the ripe old age of 70. True to life, Song's Tai Chi is based on circular movements. Many of his moves are completed by rolling the stick 360 degrees, and while they don't have amazing reach, they pack a mean punch, so underestimate the damage at your own peril. Song also has his dash attack, a slippery move that lets him circle around his opponent to unleash a devastating attack from behind. Song still has quick pokes to score points, but his big damage hits will require quick execution or a good opening to be effective. Song has a weakness that you might have noticed is fairly common in Buriki One: a lack of reach, meaning he needs to be in nice and close to dish out damage. Unfortunately, his health isn't too high, so you can't be careful enough, or the fight will be over before you know it. But Song's sheer damage potential can't be ignored, and his many years of mastery don't hide themselves in the hands of a skilled player. One of the most striking things about Buriki One, at least to me, is how strong its presentation is. The whole game presents itself as a broadcast, and does its best to make the World Grapple Tournament feel like a real event. From characters entering the venue, being given call-out entrances in the finals, or how the tournament brackets are shown between matches during the arcade ladder. During fights, the Jumbotron in the background flips between various sponsors, or real Japanese companies, and profiles on the fighters that are currently fighting. Even cooler, the images of the fighters actually reflect which costume is being used, a very neat touch. Replays, which in other fighting games are merely seen from some kind of omnipotent non-existent camera, are instead implied to be shot from the scaffolded camera rigs seen in the background. Should you clear arcade mode, you'll find that instead of the genre's traditional story-based sequences, the character endings are instead media interviews, conducted immediately after the final match. And should you not clear arcade mode, the continue screen sees your character receiving medical attention if KO'd, or irritated by their defeat should they lose via judgment. But the coolest part of Buriki One's realism goes beyond the game itself, as during the time of its release, and a little bit after, SNK maintained a website for the game that instead presented itself as a website for the tournament. While it's sadly down now, it has been archived on the Wayback Machine, although it is all in Japanese. It goes so far as to include the full set of rules for the tournament, which cleverly alludes to gameplay mechanics. There's information provided about every character, including profiles and small biographies, illustrations presented as paparazzi photography for most of the contestants, with in-universe reasons being provided for those excluded. The characters are all given tabloid-style interviews to elaborate their personalities, and a fan Q&A section was included, which fans could submit to via email, opening up the characters, tournament staff, and even the developers to all kinds of questions. By my count, Takato received the most questions with a whopping total of 60, and Rob Python received the least at only 1. Buriki One, despite all of its innovative ideas, was doomed to obscurity for the longest time. This is due to a number of factors. The game only saw a limited release overseas, and to this day has never seen a home console release. And for the longest time, graphical problems with emulation on PC meant it also wasn't the greatest option. But despite this obscurity, Buriki One has maintained a strong presence in its home country, through tournaments, and has acquired a sort of cult following overseas due to its unique control scheme and presentation. And with emulation for the Hyper Neo Geo 64 seeing vast improvements recently, it's finally becoming a more accessible title to the masses. Though obscure, the game was never truly forgotten by SNK. Guy made appearances in SNK's King of Fighters series, first as an assist-only striker character in the King of Fighters 99 Evolution and the King of Fighters 2000, and then as a fully fledged roster member in the King of Fighters 11 alongside Silber. Hopefully the game sees some more attention one day, be it a port, a remaster, or even some of the characters showing up in the King of Fighters again. But until then, the original game's not going anywhere, so give it a shot and experience Buriki One's innovations for yourself.